With his own diary tapes, former Cabinet Minister Tony Benn reflects on the activities of Britain's security services.
Few people in this country seem to realise the enormous political power wielded by the British security services, which act virtually as a state within the state. MI5 and MI6 argue that they owe their absolute personal allegiance to the Crown, and they seem to have convinced themselves that that puts them above elected governments, freeing them to do whatever they like. These services have always been very hostile indeed to the Labour Party, to the trade unions, and to all socialists, almost as if they thought that we were all secret agents of the KGB. One victim of their activities was Judith Hart, Minister of Overseas Development, whom the security services identified as a security risk, as Harold Wilson told her in 1974.
Thursday, the 17th of October. Judith Hart was in tears and she came up to me and said, "Do you know what's happened to me?" I said, "No." She said, "Harold called me in at 2:30 and said, I can't appoint you back to your department because I understand you've got communist connections." So Judith said, "Well, I've never been a communist." "No," said Harold, "but I understand you've been in contact." So Judith said, "Well, my son Stephen is a communist." "No, nothing to do with that." "Well, I can't think of anything," said Judith. And Harold said, "It's more domestic than that." "Well," she said, "I rang John Gollan in September, the Secretary of the Communist Party, to say I couldn't take part in a Chile meeting in Scotland because Jimmy Reid was there." "Oh," said Harold, "that's getting nearer the mark." So she went back to her office waiting to be sacked and was called back by Harold at 6 and said, "It's all right." It's very significant that the security services decided to pick off Judith Hart. Very significant. Very significant that Harold has decided to take it up. After all, he's known it since 59. He would have to pitch his judgment against the security services judgment. But it shows the sort of thing they're up against. It means the security services will pick me off if they get half a chance. Judith said she was very angry with Harold, but in fact she was weeping tonight. She was so upset. And I tried to cheer her up.
It later turned out that MI5 had actually confused Judith with someone else of the same name, which didn't exactly increase my confidence in them. They've always undertaken surveillance on a huge scale. Years ago, if anyone said this, they were usually dismissed as being paranoid left-wingers. Today, everyone seems to accept it as normal, but both those responses are wrong. It certainly does happen to a lot of people, as I learned for myself, when I made inquiries at the request of a Conservative MP, actually, who'd asked why one of his constituents had been refused an appointment in the civil service.
Monday, the 13th of January, 1975. I did finally get the security office report, and it was to Mr. Rome, who I suppose is the departmental security officer. Please refer to the attached normal vetting inquiry. There is some evidence that she may be a fairly regular reader of the Morning Star, the newspaper of the Communist Party. Reliable sources have informed us of this on several occasions since 1967, and she is known to have been interested in holidays arranged by the Young Communist League and in a sea trip to the Soviet Union. In 1974, there was a reliable report that her father also reads the Morning Star. Though recent inquiries have provided no grounds for believing that she or her father are actively interested in supporting the Communist Party, it is a fact that it has not been possible to discover her views on extreme political matters. She works alone as a chiropodist, and the most that can be said is that there have been no complaints about her attitude from either patients or staff at the various clinics where she has practiced. Reading a communist newspaper does not in itself necessarily imply support for the party, but we feel that to read it consistently over a long period may well indicate an attitude of mind which, on a security annotation, may cause some unease. We would therefore prefer to err on the side of caution in this case. May we please be informed of your decision in due course. Yours sincerely. Well, that is a most astonishing thing, and I will have to consider whether I minute the Prime Minister on this, because I think it is an outrage that the security services should be allowed to get away with something as remote as this. It's a question of how many fights I can have at any one moment, and of course to anger the security services may be unwise, because they can get back at me anytime they want by tapping the phone or opening my letters or planting something, and it's a very alarming insight.
In the event, I didn't take that case up, But this really was an amazing letter, indicating the principles on which the security services operated. And they were supposed to be accountable to ministers, so my anxiety increased enormously when I discovered that apparently they were doing it to me. I was, at the time, the Secretary of State for Industry, and on one occasion I rang Francis Morel, who was my political advisor, to check over a speech I was going to make, and this is what happened.
Sunday, the 2nd of March. This evening I worked very hard on my speech to the American correspondents in London for Wednesday. Well, when I had finished the speech, I telephoned it over to Francis. As a matter of fact, I tape-recorded it and then dialed Francis and set the tape recorder so she could listen. As I was sitting listening myself, Carol came down and beckoned me away, so I went upstairs and discovered that Joshua was picking up my telephone call to Francis on his radio. So obviously there is a transmitter bug in my room, whether put here by the CIA, by MI5, or by the Post Office or KGB, I do not know. But it was absolute confirmation, because Joshua picked it up on his portable radio that wasn't plugged in at all to the electrical system. And it is a very interesting confirmation of what I've long suspected, that my phone is tapped.
Here was I, a senior cabinet minister, apparently under siege, being watched at every stage, and it wasn't an isolated incident. Of course, all this was long before Spycatcher was published, but when that book did come out, I wasn't at all surprised by what Peter Wright had written, especially when he almost boasted that MI5, or some of them, had been attempting to destabilize an elected government. And over the next few months, the same thing happened time and time again.
Tuesday, the 29th of July. Our rubbish has been collected very early now for some days, on a daily basis, whereas before the collection of rubbish by the Kensington Borough Council has always been very slow and inefficient, and has been on a weekly basis. So two things. I resolved I would buy an electric shredding machine that would allow me to shred important documents. And secondly, that Josh decided that he would fit a wire and a switch and then put the rubbish on top of it, and if anyone moved the rubbish, the bell would ring in the house and we could come out or look out to see who it was. Tuesday, the 25th of November. It would appear that the area around the house is under continual surveillance, and it's beginning to worry Joshua. I'm sure it's the police, but I will have to check this because I can't let it go on. Secondly, Melissa rang home today, and the phone rang, and nobody answered it for a long time. And then a woman answered and said, "Inspector's office." So she said, what do you mean, inspector's office? What number are you? And the woman said, "What number do you want?" So she said, so the woman became very flustered, and she rang off. Well, Melissa rang home immediately, and in fact, her previous telephone call had rung at home, but nobody had had time to get to the phone before it was picked up by the inspector's office. So it sounded as if, I can't prove anything, but I may as well record it, the phone not having been answered, the bugging office got confused, and there was a crossed line, and she was put straight through to an inspector, no doubt in the office where the bugging is done. Interesting.
This went on for a very long time. Actually, we saw our rubbish being taken away in a fast car. I think it was a Rover. But there were a whole series of incidents. And it was for that reason that, sometime later, I wrote to Merlin Rees, who was the Home Secretary, and supposed to be in charge of MI5, to ask him if my phone was tapped. But I got no reply at all. I also drafted a memorandum for the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, arguing that the security services should be made more accountable to ministers and to Parliament for the policy that they followed. As a result of all this, I was summoned to see Jim Callaghan at number 10. And he, having been Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, now Prime Minister, was in the best position ever to know the full story. But his explanations were, to say the least, not exactly reassuring, since he gave me the distinct impression that he himself didn't know what was going on.
Wednesday the 25th of October, 1978, I went to see the Prime Minister alone, and this was about the security paper that I put into the Home Policy Committee. He said, I've asked you to come and see me because I feel you're peppering me with a lot of things at the moment. Now, on this business of the security services, why did you ask about whether you were tapped? Well, I said, I put in this paper, as you see. I wrote to Bernard Rees. I said I didn't hear for a fortnight. Then I didn't hear for, wrote again, didn't hear for another fortnight. Well, he said, that's because it came to me. Well, I said, it's a very important issue. Well, he said, it's all under ministerial control. We hardly bug anybody. And incidentally, your telephone isn't tapped. Well, I said, my son picked it up on the radio the other day, and my daughter picked it up. He said, it's under control here. Well, I said, how do we know? Well, he said, there must be an element of trust in this. I said, I'm not suggesting that I distrust you, but these secret services, you've no idea what they're doing. Well, he said, I've just changed the head of MI5 and MI6. As a matter of fact, he said, I've appointed Sir Howard Smith as head of MI5. Well, he said, he's just come back from our embassy in Moscow, and I told him to say goodbye to Gromyko and to say to him I'm coming back to take charge of MI5. Well, I said, if the Russians can know who the head of MI5 is, why can't it be published? Oh, well, he might be a target. He is an IRA target. Well, I said, lots of people are targets. And, yes, well, he's going to put his life at risk. Well, then, I suppose that would actually be true of the head of the armed forces, if I come to mention, but he said the whole thing's under control. Well, I said, you say that, but let me give you some examples. I said, Harold Wilson, in my presence, said that the TUC were bugged, told the CBI at a dinner in March 1971, and I said, I didn't learn that as a minister. Oh, well, Harold's just a Walter Mitty. Once, in his study upstairs, behind the picture of Gladstone, he turned it round and there was a hole in the wall, and he called Ken Stowe in and put his hand over his lips and said, shh, look, and pointed to this. And Harold Wilson's just a Walter Mitty. Well, let me give you another example. When I tried to appoint Jack Jones to the National Enterprise Board, I was told he was a security risk. That was at a time when he was carrying the whole government on his shoulders with his corporation. I said I was told I couldn't have Hugh Scanlon on the British Gas Corporation because we needed somebody who was loyal to the country. I said, how do we know it's under control? Well, he said it is, and as to telephone tapping, your telephone isn't tapped. Well, I said, I can't even find out how many phones are tapped. Well, he said, I can tell you, it's 139 telephones, and each one has to be authorized by the Home Secretary on a warrant, and every 3 months the Permanent Secretary goes to the Home Secretary, and they go over who's on the list and whether it's necessary to continue tapping. He said, not even all the foreign embassies are tapped. Well, I said, the Solicitor General supports my idea of a paper. Well, he said he knows nothing about it. I said, nobody knows anything about it. That's the point. We better get the guidelines straight. So anyway, having gone all over that was how it was left. Well, I knew the whole meeting was slightly to manipulate me, and no doubt to find out how much I knew. But I think there's a big civil liberties issue here, and I said I'm very concerned, and I have been for many years. I'm an old-fashioned radical liberal. I don't believe in all this. And he had said, oh, well, of course, if you start inquiries, you'll drive the services underground, which I thought was rather marvellous, as they are underground anyway. So I left. But it was a very interesting discussion, I must say, extremely interesting discussion.
You see, the security services never have been answerable. And although today there's a big campaign going on to make it look as if MI5 is opening up, I suspect that absolutely nothing has really changed.